Hi, this is Howard Cooper, and before we jump into this podcast interview, I just wanted to share that I've been lucky enough over the last couple of years to have interviewed a bunch of other leading therapists and agents of change, really exploring their take on everything rapid change related. What you're about to see was recorded a little while ago, but it still holds tremendous value if you're someone that wants to learn about how to help people make quick behavioural shifts. So I hope you enjoy, and to make sure you don't miss any of the new releases, then take action and click that subscribe button, and then you'll be kept in the loop when any new episodes come out. Welcome to the Rapid Change Matters podcast. My name is Howard Cooper, and for over 14 years now, I've been fascinated with helping people to create personal change quickly. But I still come across many who believe that lasting personal change has to take a long time, consisting of reliving traumas or deep psychological analysis, or simply that flawed notion that understanding why you have a problem will somehow make it go away. I'm on a mission to get people who work therapeutically with others to shift their thinking and realise that these beliefs are not written in stone. Rapid change can happen. So, to help you open up to what's possible, I'm interviewing top therapists and agents of change who are out there getting real results with real people really quickly. Before we get to the interview, I just wanted to let you know that I've written a quick-to-read, downloadable PDF on 5 strategies to amplify your client's response, with some great tips on getting your therapeutic suggestions to really sizzle. You can download this for free from rapidchange.works, where you can also find all the information about this episode and episodes still to come. Now, over to the interview. Today I'm very fortunate to be sitting here, albeit digitally, with a self-confessed hypnosis geek. As well as working as a full-time hypnotherapist and running one of the UK's busiest hypnotherapy training schools, he also finds time to host his own weekly podcast. As a leading voice and proponent of evidence-based hypnotherapy, he often has a differing view from others in the profession, but no doubt his work and efforts are certainly helping the traditional medical establishments to sit up and take more note of this hypnosis stuff. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Adam Eason.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you. Yay, go me.
Absolutely. So, Adam, it's absolutely a pleasure to have you here. But I thought maybe we could kick off and really very simply, tell me a little about yourself, what you do, how you got started.
I originally became involved in this field because, as so many people do when they come to caring professions and therapeutic professions, I had a number of psychological and physiological health issues that were helped as a result during my university years. Were helped with the use of hypnotherapy, and as a result, I went on. When I finished university, I worked for 1 year of my life. I was employed after I finished university, which funded my study as a hypnotherapist. I became a hypnotherapist then, back in the late 1990s, and set up in business. And I have been working as a hypnotherapist ever since. I see less one-to-one clients today, although I still do so, because my training college, our online business, and other projects that I'm involved in also consume quite a lot of my time. But that's in as much of a nutshell, that's where I am today. I started teaching. Probably my first love within this field, which is self-hypnosis, also back in the late 1990s, after I'd been sort of working as a hypnotherapist for a couple of years, and in the early 2000s set up my college, offering hypnotherapy practitioner diplomas and a wide range of other specialist and advanced hypnotherapy trainings, and that's sort of where we're at today.
And how would you say your views of hypnosis has changed since you've been doing it?
Well, I was taught, by a very, very lovely man. Yet the model I was taught as far as hypnosis is concerned, and the one that I utilized and used in my own therapeutic work for the first few years of my career was one that, I choose to distance myself from greatly today. So I think, I originally worked and held the belief that hypnosis was an altered state of consciousness, a unique, special, magical, wondrous state. And it was a way of communicating with the all-wise, benevolent, unconscious mind that resides within us. And it would hypnotize people and very often take them back to relive painful experiences and memories and access their unconscious mind, give them suggestions that would make them better when they awoke, and hallelujah, lightning bolts up the arse and things like that. And so invested in this particular model was I that my first book was written, adhering to that particular model. Still to this day, it's my best-selling book. Rights have been sold for that book in places as diverse and obscure as North Korea, and yet it is. Even though I'm incredibly proud that it was a book that was published in my name and that I sat down and committed to writing, the central tenets of it are something that I tend to shun and I'm very averse to today. So my journey meant that, funnily enough, when that particular book was published, I recall somebody getting in touch with me and saying to me, have you ever checked out this particular quote, or have you ever checked out this particular thing, with reference to the model of the unconscious mind? And I was like, no, I haven't. And I went and had a look, and I was hurt by all of these things that I was reading. The philosopher and psychologist of the late 1890s referred to the subconscious mind as the potential for turning a credible field into a tumbling ground for whimsies. And and the more I explored it, the more I started to seek evidence for its actual existence, the more vapid it seemed, and the more the more lost I felt, and the more insecure I felt about everything that I was doing. So I wanted to seek out what was there and what was occurring, and start to examine it. The neuroscience perspective has changed massively in the last 15 years, but even the neuroscience perspective of that time, which was about, after I've been in business for about 5 years, so about 15 years ago. And I also did some trainings with some people that had a dramatic impact upon my life. Donald Robertson in particular, he's now based in Canada, a huge loss to us here in England, in my opinion. But Donald Robertson in particular, a really staunch advocate of both evidence-based approaches, the examining the inherent principles in the original work of hypnosis by James Braid, but also the development of a cognitive behavioral approach to hypnosis, hypnotherapy, and its parallels with the socio-cognitive perspective. And these were things that just lit me up, that just really, really changed the way in which I perceived the field, the way in which I conceptualized hypnosis, not just for my own understanding and my own benefit, but also for the benefit of my clients. No longer was it a tangible notion of a trance state, which was forever being compared. I'd be teaching people, and some people would be saying, whoa, man, I was well out of it. That was a voyage to Trip Out City I was on there. And then someone sitting a couple of chairs down would be saying, I didn't have that. It's clearly not working for me. And would start talking themselves out of it, because they didn't have the same experience. This sort of non-tangible notion of depth and, that somehow being zonked out, thinking strange things and dribbling down yourself was somehow correlated to depth of trance or something like that. And we got to abandon that, which was so refreshing. It was so lovely. And we've got to abandon that. And we've got to start to recognize that actually depth is a misnomer. It's very misleading. That actually hypnosis is more of a skill. It's adopting a set of ordinary psychological attitudes, expectancies, and that actually the evidence would suggest that you can become better at it by practicing it as a skill, and you can become better at it without the need for having a hypnotist present all of the time. And what's more, that rather than attributing the benefits of hypnosis to some non-tangible external force, such as an unconscious mind, we begin to attribute it to ourselves. We begin to do wonderfully evidence-based, beautiful things like advanced self-efficacy, whereby individuals start to become more confident in what they do and thus begin to actualize those things that they're attempting to do with that growing confidence. So they become better therapeutic subjects as a result. So, the central processes as far as my own development of the beginning of my career, when I've no idea how I managed to hatchet any kind of a career together whatsoever, based upon the way in which I was delivering it, and the way in which I was doing it. Yet, and the way in which it's moved has been very much to a non-state perspective. That actually hypnosis is something, it's a combination of very ordinary psychological processes. It's a skill, it's a cognitive mindset, if you like, a positive cognitive mindset that develops and builds self-efficacy and amplifies experience and so much more besides. And, a lot of people don't like that. They don't like hearing that because I'm somehow whipping away the magic. How dare you do this? I can't wear my scarlet deep red cape anymore. Thanks to you making it all so goddamn ordinary. And my point, and that one of the things that again I find so utterly beautiful, is that by underselling it, you start to over deliver on results. And instead of positioning it and offering it as being magic, instead you position it and offer it as being ordinary and grounded and sober. And you let the results become the magic, and you let the outcomes and the fact that you're equipping people with empowering life skills, you let that become the magic. And I would say that that's probably been the central part of my own journey over the past 20 years in this field. There are components in there that I could go into a lot more depth, but heck, we have limited time here,
Absolutely.
Right? But things like depth and stuff, and it's subjective experience, and how on earth do you measure that? And you're not actually going deeper, and there's no scientific consensus or acknowledgement that somehow depth is correlated to efficacy of outcomes, or efficacy of treatment rather, and yet, also if you look at all the prominent academics and scholars and researchers of this field, ever since James Braid coined the term, so from the 1800s to the early 1900s, all the prominent academics, such as, Emil Coué, such as Hippolyte Bernheim, such as Andrew Salter, such as Clark Hull, such as Theodore Barber, who was prolific, all the way up to Irving Kirsch, the theory wars of the 70s, and so on. None of them even doff their cap to the notion of an unconscious mind, It just doesn't even get mentioned, let alone refuted. It's just a non-issue as far as they are concerned.
But I think there's a couple of things that you touched on which I find very interesting on a personal note. One of which is that, you had written a book with a kind of a diametrically opposed view. And the fact that you can almost have, whether we call it a 180-degree turn, is interesting to me, because a lot of people, I find, especially when they become very invested in an idea, struggle to turn round, even in spite of other evidence. They will manipulate or think about or reconstruct the world to suit their current belief. And I actually think it's quite amazing, and I'd love to know more about what was it. Was it just, you had, as you mentioned, a growing kind of feeling of insecurity that, is this it, or is there more to it? Or what was it that let you go, do you know what, maybe this strong belief I have about all this stuff is, I need to look elsewhere?
The field of hypnosis, the field of hypnotherapy is rife with people, that they invest money and loyalty, and they invest belief in their original training. And so much of people's original training in this field is incredibly flawed. It pains me to say so because there are some of the most wonderful people in this field. A few weeks ago, I shared a quote by Isaac Asimov on my college Facebook page, and it was referring to a culture, a strain of anti-intellectualism that Isaac Asimov said was a constant thread winding its way through political and cultural life. And it was nurtured by this false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. And the reason that I mention this is because I think this is a mentality that is rife in the field of hypnosis, and that people do get entrenched in dogma. They become so loyal with regards to it. Now, national occupational standards here in the UK show that at the very least, you ought to be doffing your cap to reflective practice. My own training believes that you understand a depth with regards to reflective practice, and that is that you understand basic fundamental stuff such as Kolb's cycle of experiential learning, so that you understand the very essence of what reflective practice is, and that is that you be objective, you be self-aware enough to recognize your own confirmation bias, and you reflect upon the work that you do in therapy. It's a basic tenet of any hypnotherapist's business and raison d'etre that they carry on professionally developing. And, I'd sort of paid lip service to that in the initial parts of my career. But, I turned round and thought, this is going to be a very bitter pill to swallow. I've written a book on a particular subject, but now I feel wholly disingenuous based upon that. And I sought solace in the notion that that this was me developing, this was me growing and becoming better, and being able to shed and even be a good example of these things that I teach, these central components of what it is to be an effective therapist, and being able to reflect objectively upon what you do and how you do it. And surely to me it became a matter of responsibility as well. I choose not to do stuff like past life regression. I mean, heck, I don't even do regression because of what the science suggests with regards to it these days. And the reason being is that I'm not comfortable taking somebody's money if I don't believe in it. Now, because I don't think that individual is going to get a genuine felt service from me. And I think that they're better off going and being served by somebody who wholly believes in that. So I'll refer them, if they're absolutely insistent, that's the direction they wish to go in therapeutically. And, and I was just the same in my mindset with regards to, the notion of the unconscious mind, the notion of hypnosis being a state, and so on. And that's where I was at. And, still today, I encounter a lot of people that blind refuse to adopt anything else. There's a lot of forums out there in the world that you go and ask questions, you go and ask and seek evidence. You and you go against the grain of these things that are sort of, that end up being churned out, the same ideas rehashed and churned out by generation of recent and modern training schools and establishments. And that makes me a bit sad. One of the things, on my own podcast we've managed to really do is to say, okay, you and I have differing perspectives and differing viewpoints, but heck, we'd go for a beer afterwards, right? We'd be friends rather than needing to have problems, or rather than suddenly, casting doubt or having to use logical fallacy to put someone down or be anti about them or something because they don't hold the same beliefs as you.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned used the phrase going against the grain. Would you say that certainly within the hypnosis world, you're someone that's seen as going against the grain?
Well, I would say that frontline hypnotherapy, absolutely. I would say that really good quality, evidence-based applications and understanding of hypnosis is not taught by the vast majority of training schools and colleges. Because heck, that would involve people having to read. That would involve, teachers having to actually examine the subject. And the vast majority of them, you mentioned some of the most prolific, important researchers and scholars that have contributed to this field. They don't even know who they are. They give you a squinty look. And so it's that kind of stuff that I tend to think is a bit disappointing. There's definitely a shift. There's definitely a shift as far as I'm concerned. Yet, there is also a chasm that exists between frontline hypnotherapy and academia. I encounter and cross paths with and exchange papers with some really awesome academics and scholars around the world as part of my own ongoing PhD study. My own PhD supervisor is Dr. Ben Paris, who has made some of the biggest contributions to the notion of inhibition of the Stroop effect using hypnosis. Really important for the understanding of cognitive neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and also understanding hypnosis, for example. And you know what? A lot of his professional academic peers, will not touch frontline hypnotherapists with a barge pole. And in fact, I hear many stories where they've felt embarrassed being at, speaking at events where presidents and directors of some of the biggest hypnotherapy associations are still supporting pseudoscientific explanations of hypnosis, still, really languishing in antiquated themes as far as hypnosis is concerned. And so this chasm, this gulf that exists between academia and frontline hypnotherapy gets perpetuated because, very few are prepared to give to the other side. And I think for me it's become not just a market for my business. It's become something that I feel strongly about and want to bridge and to make it part of my work, part of my calling, part of my art, to somehow continue to educate and make some small inroads and impact upon the field accordingly.
I mean, I think it's really interesting, especially if we talk about frontline hypnotherapy, as we call it, that traditionally, if someone went against what science and evidence suggests, then they would be accused of going against the grain.
Yeah.
And actually, interestingly enough, here there's kind of a reverse, which is evidence doesn't support a lot of stuff that frontline hypnotherapists are doing. Yet, if you don't follow their line, then you could be accused of going against the grain, which is kind of a weird irony.
Yeah, the world is still flat, according to a lot of frontline hypnotherapy, in my experience. And it's certainly one of the reasons that I spend less time on a lot of hypnosis forums out there, public forums. We have our own for that reason, because people with an inability to argue their salient points and make them in friendly, proper and have proper discussions end up saying, all that science that you talk about, Adam, you're a dick. And that's their argument. They'll divert. They'll just digress into being rude, sniping, and that's it. That's the sort of scope that they're able to apply to. I mean, I'm exaggerating.
So it's a well-formed argument, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a well-formed.
I'm exaggerating because that's my bent. That's very often the way in which I teach and give examples of things. But hopefully you get the point.
Yeah, absolutely. Just sort of moving on a side note, or moving across. I come across a lot of people, certainly in my own practice, who I think have maybe unrealistic ideas of what change is and how you go about change. I still see a lot of people who, they ring me and they say, well, I've had this problem for 50 years, so surely it's going to take 50 years to get over this thing. Or that they imagine, that I've got a little goatee beard, which, by the way, I shaved off a long time ago, and that they have to lie on a couch and talk about, their problems, or relive traumas. And I was just wondering, what are the things that you've come across that people come to, perhaps misnomers about how change works, and how do you go about sort of re-educating them?
Well, I think it's always interesting to know. I mean, so for example, I encounter a lot of people that say you don't need to re-educate. That actually, whatever they bring, whatever framework the client brings to the therapy room, you should just ride into town on that.
Hmm.
Yet, the evidence does tend to suggest that, and so for example as well, a lot of critics of sort of academia in this field, or a lot of critics of evidence-based adherence, tend to glibly suggest that a lot of the terms I've spoken about, a lot of the issues I've spoken about, are just academic and don't have any place in real life and real life therapy. Yet the evidence would suggest to the contrary. The evidence would suggest that when the client has a proper and correct, understanding, that they have a solid underpinning rationale that meets congruently with that of the therapist they're working with, then the results are likely to be greater. Also, a number of notions such as trance, for example, the very notion of trance, studies by Irving Kirsch in particular have tended to suggest that this is very misleading, and that people end up with a very, very different type of experience and even concerns about the therapeutic process as a result of it being referred to in those terms. However, the basic notion of psychoeducation and how you frame what you do with your clients is a very central part. So for me, my assessment process is also combined and heavily punctuated with socialization of the model. The way in which I would socialize clients to the model of mind and the model of hypnosis would be very similar to the way in which I would socialize them and conceptualize their own problem. Show them that hypnosis works in a very similar way to their own problems being perpetuated, like the notion of negative self-hypnosis, for example, negative or automatic thoughts. And so educating the client, explaining it, but socializing the client to my particular model of hypnosis is also something whereby we do that with hypnotic skills training. Teaching the client, doing hypnotic phenomena exercises, and then handing it over to the client with self-hypnosis and asking them to go and practice it. And that they become much more socialized to the model as a result. And again, they are experientially learning about that way of hypnosis occurring, and they become educated through experience as well as the stuff that you're talking to them about.
Hmm. And one of the things that you touched on earlier, and it's coming out again, is this idea of encouraging people to be actively engaged in the process, rather than it being I'm wiggling my fingers at you and now you're better.
Yeah, it's collaborative. It's collaborative. I mean, I won't let anybody come to work with me until they've signed to say that they understand that they are an active agent in this process, that it's collaborative, and that success within this treatment depends equally upon their attitude, open-mindedness, and application than it is of anything I can do. So many hypnotherapists that I encounter are burdened by the expectation that somehow they are wholly responsible for their clients' welfare and well-being. I can't imagine having to carry that around with me all the time. I'm responsible for all these people getting better. That's some big responsibility to carry around. You need to share that. The client needs to be equally involved. And again, I refer back, excuse me sounding like a broken record, but the wonderful thing with regards to this is that, by sharing responsibility, you also begin to build self-efficacy. And that's what you want. Self-efficacy, where the client feels, you know what, I can do this. I am doing this. I'm skilled. I'm equipped to be in control of my thoughts, my behavior, my emotions, and everything else.
I hope, Adam, you're not suggesting that if you wanted to be a good therapist, a good hypnotherapist, we don't have to wear bangly earrings.
Well, probably not. Those that know me, will probably say that, my chakras get a bit twisted from time to time, and my aura is unaligned, especially when I'm not wearing my tie-dye clothing. And but I'm probably being very uncharitable to people that are of that ilk. My job is not to say that something is wrong or something is correct. For example, what I tend to adhere to is something that I think is the most responsible stance to take for the kind of clients that I work with. I would also hasten to add that this kind of approach, I think, develops credibility, which is very, very healthy for one's career in this field.
Do you think, there is a lack of regulation within the industry, and that doesn't do the industry any favours in terms of being accepted by the medical establishments? And perhaps is there an argument that because of the lack of regulation, there's a particular type of profile of person who's maybe attracted to becoming a hypnotherapist? Perhaps they are attracted to the more magical, mystical side, or misnomers around it.
Well, the problem is that there are potentially a number of issues as well with regards to too heavy a regulation. What that would mean for the field and what that would mean for. Heck, I've watched a lot of very well-known academics even suggest that hypnosis should not be used by anybody who isn't trained in other areas. So when I say that, I mean, psychologists can use it as an adjunct. Really, it should be used as an adjunct, as a standalone treatment. And doctors could use it, dentists and so on, which sort of renders the field of hypnotherapy fairly redundant. So a lot of people get a bit uppity about that. But with regards to, I've lectured to NHS directors who have said a lot of very, very similar things, that because of the proliferation of nonsense and pseudoscience and myth and misconception, it's very difficult for them. And, the very popular media representation of hypnosis is a double-edged sword, because, in one respect, it's making people think that it's something it isn't. Yet, on the other hand, it does provide a framework for people to think of it as being powerful. I would prefer hypnosis to be something that has better levels of regulation, but how that happens without damaging the careers of people existing in the field is something that I have no answers to.
Yeah, it certainly poses many challenges. I was wondering whether you could share with people and listeners, a couple of examples of people that have experienced quite profound, rapid shifts.
Sure. I worked with a lady who had a lump, a non-malignant lump in the top of her breast, and it was causing her pain and discomfort, and it looked quite peculiar. And she had problems with conventional analgesia and anesthesia in the past. They were going to be experimenting with different things, and asked if I would examine and explore the possibilities of using hypnosis for her, and was given permission to come and be in the hospital with the lady. And And she had this entire lump in the top of her breast removed without any anesthesia whatsoever. So she was being pulled and tugged around. She could feel that. She was very aware of that, and she worked with me for about eight weeks in order for that to happen. And I think 8 hours in my company with home practice is rapid as far as I'm concerned. Um, as I said to you when we were discussing me coming and speaking together, I'm potentially just a little bit averse to this idea that stuff has to be instant. Um, um, you know, so when we talked about rapid originally, for me, I think 4 to 6 sessions, for example, which is typically the amount of times that James Braid would see his clients for, 4 to 6 sessions is rapid and is brief in contrast to, the sort of average number of sessions that Freud had, 1,300, which is a bloody brilliant business model. Well done, Sigmund. Yet, so I definitely think hypnosis and hypnotherapy are in and of itself are brief and rapid therapies. That's one. So that particular lady is something that immediately comes to mind. And I've worked with. For me, I just find the pain relief to be staggering. I worked with a little boy who was having a bone marrow aspiration. Now, I don't know if you know anything about bone marrow aspirations or such things as lumbar punctures, pediatric operative processes that are, potentially some of the most painful experiences that anybody can have. Now, I worked with him and taught him self-hypnosis, and he still had drugs. He still had some drug intervention, yet his reaction, his response when he used medication at slightly lower doses in combination with his self-hypnosis skills, and he's less than 10 years old, was just nothing short of striking as far as I was concerned. His parents were just amazed and so on. So I certainly find those kind of things incredible. My other sort of pet love has been some of my own work, certainly in line with the work of my PhD supervisor, has been using self-hypnosis and hypnosis to inhibit the Stroop effect. I don't know if you or your listeners will be aware of what the Stroop effect is, but if you imagine sitting at a computer and a Stroop test were to come up, what you're asked to do is you're asked to press the button on the keypad that corresponds with the color of the writing. So it will be red, blue, yellow, black, for example. Now, if the word red comes up and the word is red, it's very easy to press the red button. You press it really, really quickly. If, however, the word blue comes up and it's in red writing, your brain, you read the word before you recognize the color. And it creates a slowing down in the anterior cingulate within the brain. And this is called the Stroop effect. It makes you slower to respond. One of the most important things which shows that hypnosis is not compliance, for example, is that hypnosis has been proven to inhibit the Stroop effect. And within my own PhD work, I'm the first person ever to have used self-hypnosis to inhibit the Stroop effect. And I just find that amazing, to watch it, where someone comes in, they've worked and their brain responds in a very particular way. Then they give themselves suggestions for word blindness, i.e. I only recognize the color, and within an hour they can inhibit the Stroop effect. Now, to me, that's rapid change, and I think that's amazing.
It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible, and that's the sort of stuff that I can imagine people listening to at home when they're listening to this, when they're driving around, thinking to themselves, "Really, really?"
Yeah, I mean, if you go and Google Amir Raz, R-A-Z, as well as Dr. Ben Paris and the Stroop effect, S-T-R-O-O-P effect, you will find a very impressive body of work. Randomized controlled trials, and peer-reviewed research on that subject, which just shows, it's one of the most impressive applications of hypnosis, and it's very, very scientific, very important to the field of neuroscience as well. Yet, the vast majority of the hypnosis field know nothing about it.
It's absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. On a different note, whose methodology, whose work would you say has had a big impact on you, and would you recommend people reading more of or getting involved with?
I think it's really important for anybody to go and become aware of the work of James Braid and see his work for what it actually was. I mean, when we were speaking before we started recording. I teach cognitive behavioral approaches to hypnotherapy, so cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy. And most people think, oh, yeah, that's just hypnosis combined with CBT. And it's not. The cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy approach existed long before CBT was ever invented in the 50s. James Braid was using methodologies very similar to habit reversal, very similar to systematic desensitization, back in the 1800s, almost a century before CBT had existed. And even Joseph Wolper, the main pioneer of systematic desensitization, a cornerstone of CBT, for example, cites a lot of his influence from a man called Wahlberg, who was a hypnotherapist and wrote about hypnotherapy in the 1940s. So I'd say that as far as, turning so James Braid and Hippolyte Bernheim, I think, is the second most important person in the field of hypnotherapy. Emile Coué, I have a real fondness for, not just because, his autosuggestion is very akin to self-hypnosis, and, the central themes and laws are still of his work are still very, very honest and useful to anybody becoming a self-hypnotist today, and engaging in self-hypnosis. So I think that's really important and beneficial. I also think, and Emile Coué as well, one of the things that I love about him and the reason he's such a hero of mine is because, he rejected the very popular Nancy school of hypnosis of the day back in the 1920s. He rejected that. He rejected hetero-hypnosis because, he believed and discovered that people could just reject suggestion. So, it made sense to him to teach people how to give themselves suggestions and believe in it, and thus he came up with auto-suggestion. So, I found him to be very pioneering. I'd say that it's very, it's worth familiarizing yourself with the work of Theodore Barber, the work of Irving Kirsch, and certainly Nicholas Spanos and his Colton Skills Training Program have been really important influences to me. I mentioned Donald Robertson earlier because he really was the person that transformed the direction that I went in, but he's not really involved in this field anymore, which is a great shame. There's a number of academics that are doing really impressive stuff today. Certainly a man called Graham Jamieson, who wrote Hypnosis and Conscious States. For anybody really wanting to get into the neuroscientific perspective of hypnosis, he's the man to look at. His edited works with a variety of contributors make for thoroughly stimulating and illuminating reading as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely great. And I know, obviously, you touched upon sort of your initial and visceral gut reaction when I approached you to get involved with this, about is rapid change a good thing? Well, I mean, let's talk about this. What were your concerns?
My concern is that I think people need to be grounded in reality, and that is. A lot of fields, a lot of sort of modern fields really promote this notion of one stop. So, the field of hypnosis and hypnotherapy, there is a proliferation, massive, of one-stop smoking sessions. One session, stop smoking, and so on. Yet evidence shows that more sessions are better for people in the longer term if you want to stop smoking in the long term. Um, so I was thinking mainly, and also there's a number of concepts, such as NLP's fast phobia cure, which have been tested, and the kind of results that are promoted by therapists and NLP practitioners using it have not been able to be replicated, in clinical conditions or in laboratory conditions. They just can't. And very often, the reason that it's effective out there is because the practitioners believe in these processes so much that that belief and that congruence just spreads into the client. But if all you want your therapy work to be based upon is belief and your congruence in what you do, then just buy a wet fish, smack people across the head with it, and say be really sure that that person knows that you believe it's going to work. I think what my reticence with regards to that is, to suggest to people that in the first instance that change will happen really quickly, especially if they've not bought in and their belief system is not properly there in the first instance. You run the risk of entrenching them in their problem, thinking that they are a lost cause or that they're beyond help. There was for a number of years in the 90s, before advertising agencies and laws were made, people used to say 95% success rate with smokers, and I can't help thinking that in reality it's much closer to 50%. And in really stark reality, it's actually less than that. Hypnotherapy for stopping smoking, the evidence would suggest anyway, regardless of what individual people say their clinical results are, the real strong evidence for using hypnosis to stop smoking is nowhere near as impressive as people would imagine. Now, if you've been told there's a 95% success rate with this person, but in reality it's 40% or 50%, for example. Now, if you then do not stop smoking and you think to yourself, oh man, I'm one of the 5%. I'm a lost cause. In reality, you're one of the 50 or 60%. In reality, but because you've positioned it, because you've said to somebody, this will happen rapidly in one single session. And if it doesn't happen for that person, for whatever reason, I think it's good to frame things positively, but it's not good to say that rapid is definitely going to happen. And what's more, what I would say is I still think 4 to 6 sessions is rapid. I think that's comparatively brief therapy to a lot of old school approaches.
But for me, this is important because I really want people to hear lots of different perspectives and lots of things that are going to challenge some people and other people are going to be well on board with. But for me, this podcast and certainly all these conversations are designed to get people to question, to think, where are they at with things, and let's read a little wider. Listen, if people are interested in hearing more from you, where should they go? How should they get in touch?
So you can contact me via my personal website, which is www.adam-eason.com. It's just Adam Eason with a hyphen in the middle.com, or my training college, the Anglo-European College of Hypnosis, which is just AE College of Hypnosis.uk. And it is just .uk, not co.uk, okay? AE College of Hypnosis.uk.
Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that, when you're thinking about, what would we cover and what we talk about in relation to this topic, you'd like to say?
No, I think I've probably pissed off enough of your listeners for the podcast, so no problem. Well, no, there isn't really. People may have questions or so on, and maybe at a later date we come and discuss it in a different way.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely brilliant, and thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and hopefully look forward to a part 2 at some point.
Yeah, I would really like that. Thank you, Howard. It's been a real honour being here.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, why not share it with anyone you think might be interested? And even head over to iTunes to give us a glowing review. You'll find more about what's coming up on our Facebook page, facebook.com/rapidchangeworks. And of course, you'll find all the links related to this episode, plus those free 5 steps to getting your suggestions to sizzle over at rapidchange.works.